There are some stories in the Bible that we hear so often in a certain context that we just continue thinking about them in that way without really engaging and finding out what they say and whether or not the way they've been interpreted is the way they're actually written down. That's a little vague, so I'll bring it home for you. This week we're looking at the story of the widow's mite. Now, as long as I've been living, every time I've heard the story of the widow's mite, it's always been associated with stewardship and look at all of her giving and this is how we're supposed to be and isn't this a great model to follow? But just like so much of the Bible, if you really look at what's written, what's said, it's not that at all. That's the interpretation that's been laid on top of it. But that's not what actually is going on. Jesus never praises the widow, never encounters her, never engages her, never tells his friends it's a good thing. The only thing he does is point her out to his followers as they're sitting back, watching all of this happen, with her coming up and putting her money in the treasury trunks. And he's comparing her in her quiet, faithful manner, completely convinced of the right to the goodness, the rightness, probably, of giving everything she has to God as she sees it. The treasurer of the church, of course, is going to be acting on the responsibility of God's message. And comparing that to the scribes. Now Jesus has just come out of weeks, or days rather, of fighting the establishment essentially in Jerusalem. First, he comes in on a donkey and upsets the entire dynamic of the powerful king coming into the city. Then he's got people who are shouting Hosanna, who by the end of the week they're shouting kill him. He spent many times, many arguments with Pharisees and scribes and Sadducees where they were trying to trip him up and prove that he was just this grifter, someone who really didn't have the right to speak with the authority that he seemed to assume or that people were recognizing in him. And here, after all of those conversations, he sits down with his friends and a few other people that may be interested. First thing he does, we're told in the scripture, is he says, look at the scribes. Look at them walking around. Look, all the fancy robes and the fancy words, getting all the attention for themselves. They want the best seats at banquets. Now, didn't Jesus teach that if you're going to a banquet, go to the lowest seat, and if you are elevated to the highest seat, take that as an act of respect? Don't go to the highest seat and then have the indignity of being asked to go lower because you're not as important as other guests. You know, it's a metaphor he's used before. And he says the scribes demand the highest seats, the best food, the best quality. They walk around and pray out loud and look at me and aren't I so wonderful and I'm this holy, holy person. In contrast, the widow kind of sneaks in, does her thing, and leaves. And even though she's technically giving less than the scribes with their great abundance, it's costing her more to give. And Jesus says at the very end, she has given everything she has. She's got nothing left to live on. That is not a word of praise. That's just a statement of reality. She probably was going to die soon. Now, whether she was ill or whether that was just happening, who knows? But she was not able to provide for herself. She was already some of the most vulnerable people in society, and here she gave away what little security she had. Why have we turned this into such a great example of giving? Why is giving to the point of pain and discomfort and threat of death been treated by the church as this great, wonderful thing, when we have so many in the church walking around with these robes and spouting in public and doing whatever they can to get attention for themselves, who are not struggling and suffering at all with their givings? And this week, a couple of things have happened to me. One is a friend was commenting on that she was tired of agencies always asking for money. My father used to call it whining for dollars. This sense that we have to make this wonderful argument to go forth and get money. And money for what? Just causes, for arts, for care of animals. What is it that we need to do? There's entire industries that do this. Then we had a situation where a friend was talking about another friend of hers who was given a statement by her church saying that we, given your the value of your home and the career you have, we've assessed your contribution at this amount. It was in the thousands of dollars that they were expecting her to give to the church coffers. Just flat out. There was no apology. There was no suggestion. It was an expectation. It got to be so about money in this particular person's congregation that she wondered why she was even there. Where was the faith? Where was the act? We give with the expectation the church is going to take our money and do something good with it. But what happens when that doesn't go on? These are all the things that Jesus would have seen watching that widow, watching the scribes going along, watching this assumption that sacrifice is somehow a noble thing. We've turned it into a noble thing. Why? Probably because we want to get away from the fact that it's exploitation. It is cruel. It is demeaning. Because not everybody is sacrificing equally. If you come from a rich household, if you come with lots of talent, lots of status, lots of stuff, the same sacrificial attitude is not given to you. I was reading this week about how hideous it is when we have people who are not making enough money being told how to budget their money better. No, the answer is simply pay a living wage. It's not telling people who have less to do with even less. We have this incredible social inequality in our country, in our society. Everywhere we look, the rich are getting benefits and they're stacking the deck. They're putting the people in power to make those choices. And the poor are getting poorer and poorer and poorer. Inflation's going up, cost of living, everything that makes it difficult on a minimum wage. And the minimum wage is not rising to keep pace. Jesus in the scripture was not commenting on how great the widow was. He was just commenting on what he saw in front of him. The fact that she gave away everything that she had to live on. It's not a compliment. What do we do with sacrifice? Why have we turned it into this noble thing, expected of some? That's not the gospel. That's not what Jesus was trying to teach. We've got to really pay attention to where our value is. Yeah, we need money to run things, and yeah, the church roof needs fixing, but you know what? If the church disappeared, the people would still be there. If COVID has taught us as a religious community anything, it's that we can have worship, we can have community without a building. We can have something special without being side by side. It's different. It might not be to everyone's taste. It might not have the memories that people want. But the very notion of our faith has to be uncoupled from money and giving. Because the giving we give, it's not necessarily having to be money. It can be your time. It can be so many other things that we're giving that have equal or more value. Everything Jesus teaches kind of uproots and supplants our assumptions. The story is right there with it. If we are giving to the point of pain and threatening our own death, where's the point? Why is that considered noble? Where have we gone so wrong in our society that we keep having different sets of rules for different classes of people and then pretend that class doesn't exist? Jesus was not highlighting this as something noble. He was, however, commenting on the hypocrisy of those who walked around who were obviously just belching money and status with everything they did, with everything they said, with everything they wore. That he had a lot to say about, a lot of hypocrisy. Perhaps it's time for us in the pews, at home listening to videos, those of us studying the scriptures, to start looking a little closer at what Jesus says and a little less at the way traditional interpretations have presented this stuff. Jesus wants to recognize for his disciples the people who to be wary of. Those who have power are still going to want more power. Be careful of them. Watch out for them. Don't trust the scribes of David. Every translation has it slightly different, but the message is there. Be wary of those who are going to lord over you and tell you what you have to contribute to be walking God's walk, when they themselves don't do that. Hypocrisy was the number one issue in the church 2,000 years ago. It's the number one issue in the church today. If we want to be people of faith, we've got to take a really good look at how Jesus showed us to look at the world. Pay attention to the littlest things. Don't get caught up in the flair of the pageantry of those who like to be walking around in majesty and get compliments. Pay attention to little stuff. That's where Jesus is acting. That's where God is enacting. We are asked to be so much more than society's values. We're asked to turn those things on their heads. If you want to follow Jesus, call out the hypocrites. Do not think that sacrificing up to death is a noble experience. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Try to bring the message of love and togetherness and equality into our society, because that was at the root of everything Jesus taught. So don't look at this as a lesson of stewardship. It is not meant to encourage you. It is meant to be incredibly discouraging. The wrong people are giving way too much.